Good morning, my name is Juan Santana, and I'm here to present the idea of reforming science education to better promote science literacy. So, to tackle the issue of reforming science education, we have to answer three key questions like, what is science literacy, why is it important, and what can be done? So, in general, what is science literacy? Science literacy is the knowledge of the processes that go into science, understanding the natural world. You know, it has to do with understanding why things happen, like natural phenomena. But it also includes, certain aspects of using the scientific method and the way scientists think for personal decision making and for civic and cultural participation and economic productivity. Science literacy transcends the scope of just scientists. It can also go into fashion designers in the materials that they use, understanding chemistry and biology for picking appropriate materials, reporters in reporting objective news and being skeptical about their sources, and even electricians in which they use their knowledge of how laboratories work and how to do science to approach things in a safe way and think critically about the work they're doing so that they can always improve what they're doing. So, why is it important? Science literacy is crucial to how society works. It creates an involved citizenry. It allows for discussion in science policy. It lets people communicate and express their ideas objectively and think skeptically about the world so that we can create a better society and a shared humanity. So, diving into the history. John Dewey was an American philosopher and educator in the 1920s. And he was one of the very first to coin the term science literacy. He wrote about science literacy as a way of teaching the American people about science and how to approach science and also apply it to their daily lives. He imagined a United States and a world in which we had a population of citizen scientists that approach things objectively, skeptically, and curiously. Next came the Cold War. This was the first instance in which the United States became directly involved in science education. With the launch of Sputnik 1, the very first man-made satellite in 1957, the Americans were scared. They didn't know what to do. They saw this thing in the sky. They heard this beeping on transmitters and radios, and they didn't know. But the United States responded with the National Defense Education Act. And this injected funding at every educational level to produce scientists and engineers to combat the approaching advancement of the Russians in terms of technology and science. And now we fast forward to the 80s and up to present day, in which we have new modern technological needs. We have new initiatives for pushing STEM so we can get programmers and other scientists and engineers. Because as it is, society is now more than ever reliant on technology. So I conducted a study of about 180 students, high school students, in which I asked some opinion questions, like the first one. Do you believe funding for research is important? And I gave the example, funding NASA projects aimed at studying the formation of other solar systems. And I asked this question, and I gave that example specifically because I wanted to see what people think about science today. The majority think that science is important, that it's crucial, that research is crucial to humanity as a whole. And this specifically because a lot of people tend to think that funding for NASA is useless because we pour our money, we sink our money into space, and we don't think that we get it in return. We don't get any benefits in return. But specifically for studying the formation of other solar systems, with that, we're able to understand how our own solar system formed. And from that, we're able to decipher and look through previous events in history. We're able to see where we've come from. And I think that's a deeply intriguing question. It shows us who we are and how we're all connected. The next, do you believe that science plays a key role in society? And this ties back to the previous question, and the overwhelming majority of people say that they believe it's important. Have you been satisfied with science education over the course of your academic career? 20% say no. And the majority, right there, also agree that they haven't necessarily been satisfied with their education. Only 18, almost 19% think that their science education has been fantastic. And I think that's a problem. When people aren't engaged in what they're learning, are they really learning, or are they just memorizing information? So I asked, what teaching method do you believe works best for you? I got a lot of different responses, the most coming from more hands-on instruction like research, experimentation instruction, demonstration, and discussion in general, with the smallest piece of the graph being lecture, which happens to be what we use the most in science classrooms. So, what can be done? With these results from my study, I found that students are very different in what they need to learn. So to tackle the issue of science education to better promote science literacy, we have to understand 3 parts about a student's education: their engagement to the course material, the instruction itself, and the standards by which we test. So first off, engagement. A study published by Michael Belmont and Ellen Skinner found that when a teacher was more motivated to teach or expected more from their students responded positively. They found that students were more willing to engage the course material, asked better questions, and were just in general, happy to learn. And in this study, they also found that there were reciprocal effects, that when a student was more engaged in course material, teachers also, felt excited to teach. They were more interested in what they were teaching. So it was a constant back and forth. It was a positive feedback loop of students and teachers working together to learn. So when it comes to instruction, we have different methods of teaching, and there is no one correct method because, as I said, students are inherently different. No one student is the same. So when it comes to instruction, our first is based on discussion. And what I propose, the Socratic method, proposed by Socrates, a Greek philosopher. And Socratic method is basically defined as a form of cooperative debate in which you're able to vocalize your thoughts and express your ideas, and from that you can point out fallacies. You can more clearly distinguish what your ideas are and refine them. This promotes critical thinking for students, which is crucial to how we do science. We have to think critically about the world around us. And in a study published by the University of British Columbia in 2009, they found that students learned more from discussion. Specifically in this study, they had 2 groups of students. They had one that was able to discuss previous course material and try to make sense of what they were about to learn, and then they took an assessment. The other group simply took the assessment with no prior discussion. Although they didn't have any knowledge about current course material, they were able to score higher because they were able to discuss and think critically about what the subject material that was coming up had to, how it was connected to previous ideas. Research service learning. This is an idea proposed by Julie Reynolds and Jennifer Dodson, in which they analyzed an undergraduate course and they brought students together to work on a research project. It was specifically geared toward ecological conservation, and they found that students were incredibly engaged in the material itself. When they were doing hands-on research, they were able to refine not only their critical thinking skills and their observational skills. While writing research papers and while working together, they had a greater sense of cooperation. And they also were able to refine their technical writing skills. They found that the students were motivated to learn, that they were engaged in what they were doing, because not only were they doing actual research, they were engaged in community service as well. They were giving back while expanding their own knowledge. And from that picture, you can see that I work on Matter Academy's Zika research project. It was specifically geared toward handling the Zika epidemic while it was still an issue, but mosquitoes are still a problem. Most people die from malaria. More people have died from contracting different viruses from mosquitoes than have died in wars. And that's important to note because because the Zika virus has subsided, it doesn't necessarily mean that a new pathogen could come up. So we devised a mosquito trap to curb the use of pesticides. And this allows us to look at a fundamental problem in our community. We're able to separate the different sciences and analyze what we need to do. Specifically with this, we have engineering in how we draft and design this. We have the chemistry and how we attract these mosquitoes. We analyze the biology in the anatomy of the mosquitoes and how it interacts with our trap. We have ecological studies in which we analyze how this trap affects the environment as a whole in terms of predator-prey relationships between mosquitoes and predators that eat those mosquitoes. So it's just a holistic view of science while tackling a problem within the community. And I'll be glad to show you after the presentation if you're interested in the mosquito trap itself and how it works. Next, demonstration. Demonstration helps students consolidate information taught in class. Lecture is still important. You need some way to diffuse ideas to your students, but it can't be the only method in which you teach. Demonstration is crucial because once you give students a visualization of what's actually happening and they have that hands-on experience with real chemicals or real animals to dissect, they're able to associate this learning with a physical concept, something that they can remember. And that's shown in Latin Shams and Aaron Seat's study in 2008, in which they saw that multisensory instruction helps students because they theorized that our brains were specifically developed and evolved over time to learn from multisensory environments. And the way in which we teach, specifically through lectures alone, or we create this artificial education. Our brains were geared toward learning in multisensory environments, and lectures don't provide us with that unique opportunity to learn in the most optimized way. Next comes the issue of standards. Standardized tests incentivize disconnected curriculums. They don't allow for proper curriculum development. Standardized tests are important in an objective way. You need a method for testing what students have learned, but it can't be the sole method for devising curriculums. You can't base a curriculum off standardized tests. And in the study performed by Bobby Solly, he analyzed elementary school students in which he found that they were less motivated to learn. They actually didn't find the instruction meaningful. You create a disconnected curriculum in which you learn concepts as they go. But in science, it's crucial to understand that things are fundamentally connected. You need some way of relating topics back to one another to better understand the world around you. So in conclusion, what we learned is that science is uniquely important to society. Science literacy has a positive effect on society as a whole. It doesn't only apply to scientists, but it applies to people in general. When it comes to voting, when it comes to arguing for science policy, which affects us in a very significant way, in which we can determine what happens with our cybersecurity. We can determine what happens with funding for climate change research. And now comes the issue of reforming education. My solution, we create a multifaceted educational, we need to gear our education to be more multifaceted. It can't just rely solely on lectures. It has to come from more demonstration, more research. And although some of these studies were geared more towards elementary or some were conducted for undergraduate level, I think it's important to get students involved in science, even if they're not going to pursue a career in science. Because learning about science literacy and being scientifically literate means that you learn about who you are and where your place is in the universe. Thank you.